Well, I think that wherever people of faith settle, they always want their children to, share the beliefs that they've had. So wherever they've settled, they've always, not always, but often have sought to establish schools.
Morning brews, coffee comes, I am never ready. I will tie my shoes on tight until the sun is setting. Morning brews, coffee comes, time is never ready. I will tie my shoes on tight until the sun is setting. I've got a long way to go, and it's a long road behind.
Virginia Mennonite Conference started with a group of people who came down from Pennsylvania and eventually made their way into the Shenandoah Valley. But largely they were Mennonites who came here to the valley to settle. When they first came here to the valley, they were one of three large minority groups in terms of denomination. There were Brethren, Presbyterian, and then Mennonites. And in the early years, mostly they participated in the public school system, although there were at least two schools that existed early on, one at Weaver's Mennonite, which those classes were held in the German language, and there was also one at Hildebrand. So in general, I would just say that wherever Virginia Mennonite Conference folks settled, they early on started schools to care for their children and to teach them the beliefs that they held dear.
Eastern Mennonite University was founded in 1917. It was located here in Harrisonburg after several other locations were considered, including Haymarket, Virginia, near Washington, D.C. I think it's pretty clear that the founders were not about to put a university close to a major city. In those days, the idea was that it needed to be a little bit more separate from those activities in the city, which might not be so conducive to a liberal arts Christian college. Founded in 1917 primarily as a Bible school, academy, that is a high school. Within a couple of years, I think 1922, 2 years of college were added, and then later became a four-year institution, much later added a seminary, and so we are now primarily an undergraduate institution with 5 master's degree programs and a seminary.
EMU got started because several leaders in the Virginia Conference were much concerned that the young people were going away to schools, state schools, and other secular schools that for an education, and that they were lost to the church because of that. So they began in Warwick County, Warwick, West Virginia, or Virginia. The several individuals, several people who were much concerned, began to hold meetings and then eventually to try to erect a building down there for the new school.
Well, the founding of Eastern Mennonite University really was a Virginia Conference entity from its beginning. And for many years, the Board of Trustees came only from Virginia Conference.
It was a conference school, and it was run by conference. Conference had not only the board of directors by that time, but a committee on administration and a committee on hiring faculty and overseeing the school. It was a very close relationship.
In the early days, chapel and campus church are both to be seen as important. Regular chapel, in which we were all required to be there, was a part of the community of learning here. The church was a meeting that met on Sunday morning on campus.
Well, Parkview got started growing out of the church on the campus, the college congregation, which met really from the very beginning of the school's beginning in 1917.
Parkview was officially chartered as a congregation in 1953, but it really existed in another form for quite a few years before that. It was actually, it's listed in our conference handbook as starting around 1919, I think, 18 or 19, which coincides with the founding of Eastern Mennonite College, or school at the time, because the school itself began to have a Sunday morning worship service on a regular basis. And so the students and some faculty began worshiping together regularly on Sunday mornings as early as the late teens or early 1920s. So there's been some form of worshiping community that since 1920 that then transitioned into being called Parkview Mennonite Church in 1953. The Harrisonburg district of the conference was formed largely because of Parkview's connection to Eastern Mennonite University. In the early years of the conference, there was no Harrisonburg district. It's one of the newer conferences, relatively new. So as a result of EMU's presence here in Harrisonburg, these other churches began popping up, as well as Parkview's relationship with EMU. So the conference felt a need to form a new district to meet the particular needs of these city churches that did not feel as much of a connection to the long history of Virginia Mennonite Conference, but were newer churches and more connected to EMU. So that's really, EMU had an impact in the fact that Harrisonburg District even was formed as part of the conference.
Virginia Conference has had a tremendous influence. One of the other parts of that relationship that's rather interesting historically is a lot of the Virginia Conference congregations that currently exist were started by EMU students in the first place. So through YPCA, Young People's Christian Association, a lot of our students provided service as Sunday school teachers, musicians, Bible school teachers in the summer, and then even pastoral services in local communities around Harrisonburg, which then ultimately became full-fledged congregations. You can name probably a dozen or more current existing congregations, most of them outside of Harrisonburg, that were started by EMU students some years ago. So that's an interesting outgrowth of the relationship between the conference and the institution that a lot of people wouldn't necessarily know about.
YPCA program took students into a lot of areas here in the Shenandoah Valley. Many rural areas, but as I say, into the cities too. I went to Stanton. We would spend the entire day there on Sunday. We would have services there in the morning and again in the evening. So that's what we did every Sunday.
I remember when I came to EMU as a junior, the one thing that I most wanted to do was to participate in one of the Y churches. Everyone that I knew who had come to EMU would come home to Oregon in the summer and talk about my Y church. And so I assumed that's what I would do. And so the time came to sign up to volunteer for this, and I did. And all my friends, found out where they would be going to church, and I never heard anything. So I made contact with the Y office and was gently told that because I had short hair, I wouldn't be accepted at any of the Y churches. And it was really kind of crushing because that was one of the primary reasons that I wanted to come to EMU.
We went as EMU students, but I'm not sure that we were so conscious of trying to get people to know EMU. I think we were more concerned with helping them come to faith in Christ.
Some still attend what we call the Y Church, although because those congregations are now full-fledged congregations, up and running, so to speak, they don't need the student in the same way that they might have depended on us 30, 40 years ago. A lot of the activity has more to do with service opportunities. YPCA organizes spring service trips for students over spring break. It would be a rare year that there wouldn't be at least 2 groups that would spend their spring break here. doing service somewhere. Might have been at Katrina after that happened, or other places of service. My understanding is that we usually have people involved with Big Brothers Big Sisters, sometimes with prison ministries. There'd be a list of a dozen or more activities that persons could volunteer to be a part of through YPCA if they so choose to do that.
Eastern Mennonite High School was a part of the college community. Its separate building accounted for much of its uniqueness in development, but all of the years that I was president, I was also president of Eastern Mennonite High School. I would go down there almost weekly and speak in chapel, and met occasionally with the faculty, but more and more we turned things over to the superintendent of the high school. The last year of my presidency, the issue came of separating the two.
More and more, it became clear that it was necessary for good teaching and good relationships in general for the college and high school to separate. And they did that rather gradually. They appointed a director of high school who I think for some time was directed high school in the same building, but then at a certain point the new building, the high school building, was erected, and the high school was moved down to that building.
I would say that Virginia Conference, with the inclusion of other groups in the Board of Trustees, until we had 5 Eastern Conferences on the Board of Trustees, they began seeing the college answering to a broader picture than just Virginia. But the high school could remain Virginia's program. So I think emotionally, there was a tie there to the high school that said, these are our young people, this is Virginia's program. And the high school quit having dorm students. So the students we used to get from Lowville and over it to Alden, New York, and other parts of the country that didn't have a high school then, this dropped off and we lost a lot of these students. And from Florida, they developed a high school. So the change meant that Virginia Conference was saying the high school is our program. The college became a broader program. So the break from Eastern Mennonite College came at the end of the 70s for Eastern Mennonite High School.
The role that the Virginia Conference plays in the whole EMS, that would be elementary, middle, and high school, they have a board member representative of different conferences in the area, and then they serve on the board. And that way communication happens between the EMS and then the larger church in the area. In 2005, the spring of 2005 is when I got involved in the elementary school. Previous to that, there were several parents and families, Mennonite families, that were interested in starting EMES. And they went to the middle and high school and asked if they would be interested in starting the school and being a part of the larger EMS community.
There was a group of parents, even before I became involved, who had been talking about having an elementary division. And from what I heard later, this had been in discussion several times throughout the years of EMHS's existence. And we became interested and started asking questions and found a group of other parents who had children within similar ages. And so we started talking with them, and eventually a group came together and we approached the board of the high school asking if they would consider this.
Discussions happened for a year or two before finally money was raised for that as a startup fund, and then eventually, finally in the fall of 2005, the school was started.
So within the high school, the elementary would be another division of the high school in the sense that philosophically and educationally, the ideas of the gifted behaviors are certainly extended into the elementary, and we certainly are working continually at having it be a K through 12 curriculum scope and sequence. And EMES at this point, it's obviously separate in location, and there are some things that are a little bit more separate and have been from the start, but we're working more and more towards having it be more of a K through 12 kind of program and philosophy as well.
Well, I think one thing that we often hear about when students come to Eastern Mennonite Elementary School is that they love to come to school and they love to learn, and they're very excited about learning. Parents are happy because students here are learning how to learn. And so the process of learning, the process of writing, and the process of reading, and scientific process, the process of those kinds of things in which kids learn how to learn is something we focus on.
Virginia Mennonite Conference, in founding EMU back in the early part of the 1900s, obviously made a huge contribution to Christian education by Mennonites in this community. And the fact that Parkview Mennonite grew directly out of Eastern Mennonite College and University, we have a lot of educators in this congregation, people who are professionally educators. They've either taught for many years at the college or seminary level or high school level. In some cases, they also are educators in the public school system surrounding this congregation. But a large number of our membership are made up of professional educators, teachers of some kind or administrators of some kind. As a result, they have also gone out from this community and done education in other places.
One of the unique things is that EMC produced so many people with missionary conviction. Early in my presidency, someone did a survey and said 53% of all the people out under mission boards, MCC, and so on had attended Eastern Mennonite. Another thing, it held the primacy of our commitment to a church and wrestling with the implication of two basic doctrines, nonconformity and non-resistance, how to live in our society and be a different people. And I would say the church has helped hold the college to awareness that we are first of all members of the kingdom of heaven, or the kingdom of God, and not a part of the social milieu.
We've had members teach in schools in India, in Ethiopia, in Tanzania, in Central America, several places in Central America. So yeah, we have had a lot of our members doing education from a faith perspective in countries all around the world. And it all stems back to this congregation being formed out of this educational community, Eastern Mennonite School and its environment, and the Virginia Mennonite Conference that gave rise to it.
I've often quoted George R. Brunk I. He said about Eastern Mennonite School, "Here shall arise a temple of learning that shall widely bless the church and produce a generation of young people who will hold the gospel ground against the world."
Seasons come, seasons go, silence is a welcome. There are stories in the ground, we'll join them in the autumn. Seasons come, seasons go, silence is a welcome. There are stories in the ground, we'll join them in the autumn. Seasons come, seasons go, silence is a welcome. There are stories in the ground, we'll join them in the autumn. Seasons come, seasons go, silence is a welcome. There are stories in the ground, we'll join them in the autumn. We got a long way to go. We got a long road behind. It's a long way to go. We're gonna meet you up ahead.